lot of the multipolarity debate stays at the level of state rivalry as if more poles explains the present. Your starting point is different. Capitalism reorganizing power spatially across jurisdictions and doing so through violence, law, and circulation control. What made this book necessary now, and what does that starting point, like you see, that state-centered multipolarity cannot?
First of all, it is fair to remind that The Rest in the West is a co-authored book. It is the third book I write
Yes.
with Brett Neilson. And yes, indeed,
Yes.
as the subtitle already suggests, we take issue with the notion of multipolarity. First of all, let me say that our own way to look at multipolarity is peculiar also because we don't take multipolarity as a kind of normative concept, as a goal. Nowadays in public discourse, particularly, but not only in the so-called global south, multipolarity is posited as a goal, as a kind of notion that encapsulates a fairer potential. This is not the way in which we look at multipolarity. For us, multipolarity is first of all an analytical tool, a tool that allows us grasping the state, the predicament of the world as it is. From this point of view, multipolarity for us does not coincide with an order. It is rather another name for the systemic chaos we are living through. And it is from this point of view that we qualify multipolarity, saying that what confronts us is centrifugal and conflictual multipolarity. So this is for me a first important point. And then I come to what you were rightly saying in public discourse. Again, multipolarity is usually framed also in the West along the lines of the discipline of IR, of international relations. And indeed, the very language of polarity emerged out of the study of international relations. The problem with this notion of multipolarity is precisely that it is centered upon states, the kind of privileged or even unilateral sense. It is centered in particular around so-called great powers, meaning that the multiple poles coincide each with one great. We try to challenge and problematize this way of thinking of multipolarity. Of course, we take into account the relevance of states, and in particular of big continental imperial states like the US, Russia, China, but even Turkey, India, Brazil. But then we say that in order to understand the current multipolarity, you have to take into account the operation of capitalist actors. And we stress the fact that there is a constitutive tension between the spaces of capital and the conventional political spaces. This means that poles do not coincide with great powers, that there is a process of pole formation in which you have to carefully analyze both the kind of connection between capital and great powers and the disconnections. Having said this, we also add that in order to get an idea of current forms of centrifugal and conflictual multipolarity from the angle of a process of pole formation that is far from accomplished, you also need to take into account a third analytical layer, the analytical layer that is provided by social movements, social forces, social conflicts that kind of have effects in the production of spaces. Sometime working in tandem with processes of pole formation that are already underway, other times contesting them, interrupting them, even hijacking them.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the key arguments in the book is how both of you distinguish world system from international system, then names the fracture across both, uh, and giving that fracture a concrete content, control over transnational circulation and supply chains becomes a primary terrain of advantage. What is the clearest sign that is not rhetorical but structural in that context?
You know, I was already mentioning the kind of tensions that exist between conventional political spaces, political maps, and the spaces of capital. This is not new, of course. Such tensions have long existed in the capitalist world system. Our point is nonetheless, that the tensions between what Giovanni Arrighi used to call territorialism and capitalism have reached a kind of unprecedented point. And this provides us with an important viewpoint on the current international and world turmoil. You are right.
Yes.
We stress the difference, the distinction between the international and the world system. In the book, we engage in kind of detailed discussion, particularly with the work of Giovanni Arrighi. To put it quickly, I mean, the point is more or less the same that made at the beginning of our conversation. The international system is centered around nation states, while the world system is characterized by kind of articulation between nation states and capitalist actors in an attempt to politically organize the world market. So if you simply look at the current crisis from the point of view of international system and its crisis, you basically see nation states, supranational organizations, while we think that a shift is needed, as I was saying before, a shift that leads us to emphasize the role of operations of capital, the role of what we call the operative spaces opened up by operations of capital in order to get a fuller and more accurate picture of the turmoil and particularly of what we call the conjuncture of war that we're living through.
Yes. And when both of you say in the book conjuncture, I know you're building on, I think, Lenin and Stuart Hall and a variety of inspirations. What are the main thresholds you're pointing to, and what do they change about how we read struggle in this moment?
You know, we speak of conjuncture having in mind such important thinkers as Louis Althusser and Stuart Hall, behind them Machiavelli and Gramsci. And we speak of conjuncture, we propose a conjunctural analysis in order to be able to grasp at the same time structural developments and, aleatory factors that intervene to deviate many times structural developments. In the book, we basically refer to two important thresholds, which means, on the one hand, the global COVID-19 pandemic, on the other hand, the Ukraine war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. And we speak of a concatenation between these two thresholds, which is, not a necessary concatenation. It is precisely a conjunctural concatenation. Looking at the present from the angle of the COVID-19 pandemic, what emerges and what we stress in the book is the relevance of reproduction and circulation, reproductive labor and logistics, infrastructures of circulation for the working of contemporary capitalism at the global level. So we try to analyze also struggles from the point of view of this kind of new salience of reproduction and circulation today. In the last chapter of the book, we speak of such important struggles as the new feminist movements in Argentina and Latin America, struggles over pension in France and other places in the world. But we also look at struggles in logistical warehouses, including the warehouses of Amazon, again, in different parts of the world. When we turn to the Ukraine war, what emerges as a challenge is the necessity to build a movement to coordinate the struggles capable to effectively contest and stop the war. Let me add that we do emphasize very much this concatenation between the COVID-19 pandemic and the Ukraine war. We also take the COVID-19 pandemic as a lens to analyze some aspects of the Ukrainian war, particularly from the point of view of the relevance of logistics and infrastructures. The book provides a conjunctural analysis, as I was saying. It was finished in May 2023, which means that we do not speak of Gaza. You will not find any reference to the genocide in Gaza because the book was finished before that.
Yes.
These are the risks and challenges of conjunctural analysis.
Yes. Another key element in the book is that war enters here not as an event, but as a form that reshapes political economy and everyday life beyond combat. What has to be present for regime of war to apply? And what does that concept, like you name, that say militarization or security alone cannot, and I should have said what it allows you and Brett to name, that militarization or security alone cannot?
Yes, thank you. This is a very important question. Question that has very much to do with the threshold represented by the Ukrainian war. I used to say that since 2022 by saying that I borrow an image from Frantz Fanon, who in The Wretched of the Earth famously spoke of an atmospheric violence as constitutive of the colonial condition. So war is in the air today. This does not mean, of course, that there were no wars before 2022. Know it too well.
Yes.
Neither it means that such wars were less important than the ones we are currently confronted. But the conjuncture changed, and it is precisely due to this shift in the conjuncture that war became atmospheric, that we are confronted not only with a proliferation of wars, but also with the proliferation of what we call war regimes. By war regimes, we understand why the processes of militarization, of economic, social, political life, militarization even of public discourse that you can note in different parts of the world. To this,
Yes.
I would like to add something, which means that even the transformations of warfare in our digital age contribute to the blurring of the boundary between war and peace, and therefore to the proliferation of war regimes. I think that even more clearly than we did in the book, we must speak today of war regime, having in mind the combined processes of militarization of the digital and digitalization of warfare.
And what is the everyday register of a regime of war? Price, mobility, policing infrastructure, or is it legalistic? What are the everyday registers of a regime of war?
I think the militarization of social life is something that you experience in everyday life. Again, in many parts of the world, including Italy, the country from which I am speaking now. I think that the regime of war is be analyzed together with the growing spread of authoritarianism in the present world, with the growing spread even of new forms of fascism. This is part and parcel of what we call war regime. Then, you have many ways in which you experience in different places, in different moments, the war regime at the level of everyday life. To put it very simply, if I go to a gasoline station these days in Italy, I have to pay a lot of money for gasoline, and this is directly connected with the war in and around Iran. Teenagers in Germany will be required to ask for the authorization of the army to leave the country because there is a debate in the country on the need to reintroduce the draft mandatory. These are just two very different kind of examples that give an effective instantiation of the atmospheric character for the war regimes nowadays.